Sanders from tonight. Chris Matthews, in addition to his duties in the spin room, has been watching and thinking about all this. Chris, what do you make about this conversation we've been having up here in New York?
Well, I think there's a couple things that strike me, and they're anecdotal, but when Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was telling the story of his life the other day in the hearing, and he talked about America as a country where right matters. And I thought that kind of immigrant patriotism is something that really doesn't have much to do with left versus right. It's sort of a feeling about the country. You may want to make radical change in this country, like Woody Guthrie, this land is our land, or Kate Smith, and God Bless America. But there has to be sort of a piece there about America and your affection for the country you start with, and then you work from that to fix it. And I think when I look at some of the issues about choice, or issues like same-sex marriage and all, I think the Democrats always miss the cultural piece. They seem to be right on the economics, but they miss the cultural piece, and how people feel about things. I mean, I've been pro-choice since Roe v. Wade was a court decision, but I have a different view about abortion than other people do. I think Pelosi does too. I think Pennsylvania is pro-life in a way that's pretty real. And I think it was one of the reasons why Trump went up there. Now, Trump is a mountebank. He's a charlatan. But he plays on these cultural issues, make America great again. They're honest feelings, but he exploits them and distorts them in his purposes. I think affection and patriotic feeling about the country and feeling about life and choice and traditional values, if you will, the Democrats are very cold about those things, and I think they really miss a chance to win by simply identifying with the feelings of the country better than they do. And that's the only thought I have tonight. And I caught it again tonight with Bernie Sanders saying, the country's corrupt, our system's corrupt. Be careful about that language, Bernie. You know, be careful that our system of politics is corrupt. That's too strong. I'm sorry, it has corrupt aspects. But to say our democracy is corrupt is a bad starting point with a lot of people's hearts about this country. That's what I think.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.